The American military has headquarters here in Washington, D.C. From the White House and the Pentagon building, our leaders run a worldwide military network. From early colonial times till today, black Americans have played important roles in the making of our country and our military history. This film will show you a little bit of that history. Here at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, several Army Guards march 24 hours a day to honor our unknown military dead. Unknown to most Americans is the fact that black Americans were flying in the U.S. Army Air Corps during World War II. During the early months of World War II, which started in 1941, black Americans were reluctantly allowed to enlist in the U.S. Army Air Corps. They were trained at a new Army Air Base in Alabama called Tuskegee. After basic flight training at Tuskegee, several Tuskegee Airmen were sent here for advanced flight training. This is Selfridge Air Base near Detroit, Michigan. The Air Force Thunderbird flying team is flying in for an air show here. The precision flying is a good example of the teamwork involved in running a large complex organization like the U.S. Air Corps. Selfridge has a long history as a military air base. The Tuskegee Airmen are part of that history. The black airmen were stationed here and in Army air bases in Africa and Europe. Now it's been over 40 years since World War II ended. The Tuskegee Airmen have returned to Selfridge to be a part of the air show. In the early 1970s, the black veterans formed a national organization called the Tuskegee Airmen. They are dedicated to helping black youth get into college and aviation by providing scholarships and being role models, and also maintaining a museum in Detroit, Michigan at historic Fort Wayne. Members of the Detroit chapter, Tuskegee Airmen, meet for a reunion with the B-25 medium bomber. Several of these airmen were in the 477 bomb group. The 477 was made up of 3 squadrons of B-25s with all black crews. Most of the Tuskegee Airmen were college men. Elmore Kennedy on the left was a B-25 squadron commander. Most of the Tuskegee Airmen were college men. They had either graduated from college or had a few years of college training. Ex-B-25 pilot Robert Walker. Walker's here on the right. Alexander Jefferson's in the middle. Nate Carr is on the left. After the 477 bomb group was activated, they were stationed at Godman Field in Kentucky. Later they moved to Freeman Field in Indiana. The P-51 Mustang was used by the Tuskegee Airmen as their mainline aircraft in Italy. It's a fighter aircraft. The B-17 Flying Fortress was the most used heavy bomber used by the Army Air Corps to bomb Nazi Europe. The B-17 squadrons were based in England. Quite often the black airmen's mission for the day would be flying protective escort for the B-17 squadrons flying out of England. Several of the Tuskegee Airmen were killed overseas. Some were shot down by German pilots and anti-aircraft guns. Some were killed in flying accidents. 66 were casualties. For the young airmen, Africa and Italy was their first time out of the United States. That and flying for the Army made it the adventure of a lifetime. Friendships were made that would endure for the rest of their lives. Italy is a country with a long recorded history, a showcase for history. The airman's life over there meant months of living in crowded tents and sleeping on folding cots. The food was the same canned food that the rest of the regular Army units received. The air bases were temporary installations set up for a few months' use. The trips overseas were made on crowded troop ships. Any veteran who's ever been on one will tell you about how crowded they were. The journey to Europe usually took about 4 or 5 days. Most of these young men did a lot of growing up fast in North Africa and Italy. The discipline they learned in the military would benefit them for the rest of their lives. One of those airmen on the left, Charlie Hill, returned to Detroit, Michigan to become a school teacher. To him, Italy was a beautiful country in spite of the war and all the destruction every place. He said that the Italians were nice people. The ground crewmen had their work cut out for them. Somehow they managed to keep the pilots flying. The months of training the airmen received now became the difference between life and death as they flew out on regular combat missions. The airmen found that the training that they had received would make a big difference in the way they survived in combat. Most of these men knew that their life was on the line, and if they weren't better than the other pilots they were up against, they wouldn't be going back to the United States. They wouldn't make it back. The B-25 squadrons were not sent overseas. They were always plagued by a shortage of trained personnel. Elmore Kennedy and Robert Walker. These are the men who flew the B-25s and maintained the B-25s. It's a very proud part of our aviation history to have had these medium bomber squadrons out there flying under combat conditions during wartime, wanting to go overseas, but they never did get sent overseas. They were never cut orders to go overseas. These are our B-25 pilots and crewmen. The B-25 pilots say that the B-25 was a smooth-flying, well-engineered aircraft. The Air Corps used a process of elimination to screen these men as they went through Tuskegee flight school. Only the best survived. The reunion's about over now, and the pilots are saying goodbye. All of the military services were integrated by President Truman in 1949. Since then, minorities and women have been and continue to be valued workers in our military services.